Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Enzi, the problem is that if we try to do these things one at a time, we won't get it done. You've got to take that comprehensive approach. And I don't know how bad it's got to get before we can get everybody to the point of being all willing to pull up and hitch up their belts to do a comprehensive approach. Now, let me give you an example. You mentioned the 6 things that, 6 major components. Well, you know, one of them was health care cost containment. Well, you know, why should Medicare be paying the premium price for drugs instead of the discounts that the U.S. government gets in the drugs for Medicaid? Well, we know why. Why is there royalty payments that's not being paid for the extraction of oil from the Gulf of Mexico? That's a tax expenditure. Well, we know why. So if you try to take individually items on, you're not going to be able to get, you're going to get beat because the powerful interests are there that can always beat you on an individual basis. So now I want to ask a question. You all have put Social Security as part of this overall reform, and I agree that it has to be. But you also are quick to point out that nothing in the way of Social Security savings here goes to help the deficit. So other than the symbolic value of tackling Social Security for the long term, which is a notable goal, and which, by the way, was one of the finest achievements of the U.S. government back in 1983, when Social Security was down to about 6 months of before going into cardiac arrest. Everybody came together in a bipartisan way, and 2 old Irishmen, one named Reagan and one named O'Neill, got it done. My question is, other than Social Security, why does that have to be so much a part of it, since it's not actually helping the deficit, which is what we're trying to get to right here, other than the symbolic value?
I think it's a lot more than symbolic. First of all, we had no choice. If you look at the President's 2-part mandate, the second part of that mandate required us to look at the long-term entitlements and the effects they have on the country. In addition, we really felt like we had a moral obligation to face up to Social Security. You know, we're not making this up. Social Security really does. The trust fund is exhausted. All of the interest earned on the trust fund for the funds that's lent to the general fund are exhausted in 2037, probably before that now, because of what we did at the end of last year. And benefits will have to be cut by 22%. That's under current law. You know, that's not something we made up. It happens. In addition, it's a fact that I think I'll just leave it at that. You know, we've made promises as a country that we cannot meet. And what we tried to do was to restore the solvency of Social Security for 75 years while protecting the most disadvantaged and, in fact, giving them a higher benefit so they could have some kind of quality of life.
I think, too, that we have seen, at least I saw in my 18 years here, sometimes they'll, for budgetary purposes or you know, gimmick figures, they will use the trillions, the $2.5 trillion of Social Security as not counting it against the budget. And then sometimes they will count it, you know. And when you have a figure of $2.5 trillion in surplus and people are saying that you stole it and all the drama that goes with that, it just seemed to us to let people know that if you do nothing and the howling and shrieking by these interest groups, and don't think we didn't believe we'd be savaged in this country by what we propose, by groups, you know, I'll name only one. I'm the only living person that ever had a hearing on the AARP. They're still looking for me. But you can't play games with it unless you just want to go up to all these toughies on the other side who are saying, you rotten finks, you're going to touch my precious Social Security I pay. Great, pal. Waddle up to the window, your relatives, in the year 2037 and get 22% less and downhill the rest of the way. And there's no way to avoid that. You can appeal, you can pull out the Constitution, because it pays only payable benefits. It will not pay scheduled benefits. And if everybody can wake up and figure that the thing they get from the Social Security when you're 65, here's your scheduled benefit, it won't be there because you did nothing.
Thank the Senator. Senator Graham.
Thank you both. I really do appreciate what you've done for the country. And if we're wise, we'll take some parts of what you've done, add it with some of our wisdom, if we can muster any, and do something. And if we're politicians who are not wise, we'll all get beat. I think America really wants us to do something. Can you imagine a budget being generated by a Republican or a Democrat that doesn't have meaningful entitlement reform, and that would be a serious effort to solve our financial difficulties?
No.
Can you imagine any scenario where we can save Social Security from impending massive cuts, 30% in 2037 or maybe more, or any entitlement program without adjusting the age for eligibility? Is there any sensible way to do it without adjusting the age?
You can do it without adjusting the age, mathematically. So, yes. But we thought you should adjust the age. As you know, you're not eligible for Social Security at 65 today.
Right.
You're eligible at 66. And under current law, it goes to 67 in 2027.
Senator Simpson, can you imagine any scenario of saving Social Security and Medicare or getting our debt situation in better standing without adjusting the age of eligibility?
I think it's impossible. The average age is 77, is going to go to 80. As I say, 63 was the date of the life expectancy, and 65 was the retirement. Now, you can retire at, we used to be able to retire on Social Security, you might live 3 or 4 years. Now you retire on Social Security, you may live 20. So how is that supposed to be when there were 16 people paying in and now there are only 2 people paying in 10 years? Those are, I tell people, read the trustees' report on Social Security. It's done by Democrats and Republicans for years.
Now let's build on this. Can you imagine a scenario of saving Social Security from bankruptcy or major cuts without some forms of means testing of benefits?
Again, arithmetically, you can do it, but it's not what we would recommend.
Now, both of you talk about sacrifice, and one thing we like around here is patting ourselves on the back, how brave we all are. I would argue that nobody in this room, including both of y'all, are doing anything near like going to Afghanistan. So let's put this in perspective. All we're asking people to do is to do things that make sense. The sooner you do it, the better off we all are, because if you do it sooner, that means the solutions are not as draconian. So let's talk about means testing and sacrifice. If you took an idea that said if you make $50,000 or less in income, including Social Security, you wouldn't have your benefits adjusted, what would that mean for the people that make over $50,000? You'd have to have your benefits reduced somewhat. Is that correct, Mr. Bowles?
You would probably have to slow the rate of growth in
Right.
benefits.
For a
You really
guy
wouldn't
like me,
have to have the benefits reduced.
You know, when I was 21, my mom died. When I was 22, my dad died. My sister was 13. Social Security survivor benefits came to my sister, made the world a difference. I'm 55. I don't have any kids. I'm making $170,000 bucks a year. I'm going to have a military retirement, hopefully a congressional retirement. What would it mean for someone in my income level, in actual, the difference between what is being promised and what would be paid? Do you have any idea how much it would affect my benefits if we did a means test for people in my income level?
I don't know exactly what.
Would it be $100 a month, $200 a month?
I can't tell you exactly.
Could you get me that number?
Sure.
Because I believe it's going to be very small.
Yeah, and one of the things I can tell you is that your benefit actually wouldn't be cut. The rate of growth in your benefit would be at a slower rate.
So means testing is not cutting anything, it's paying people what you actually can afford.
Yes, what it does, it grows it at the rate of inflation rather than at a higher rate.
So you have a progressive price indexing.
Yes.
Senator Simpson, do you think that's a smart idea for us to embrace?
Well, I think anything. What I tell people is this. I'm 79, and so I see these people in the room, you know, with their signs and you know, all sorts of activity. I'll say, wait a minute, pal. I put $5 in it when I was 15, worked at the Cody Bakery. I was in the Army, and you did put it in when you were in the Army, not now. And for the most productive years of my life practicing law in Cody, I never put in over $874 a year, and neither did any other guy in the United States. This is fakery.
Well,
Man, I got stuck for $1,200, $1,400, $2,000, $4,000, finally on up. But let me tell you, you're going to get it all back. When in '83, we found that the guy got out, got everything back plus 6% interest in 3.5 years.
Would both of you urge the Congress to take up Social Security reform as part of this effort to bring about fiscal sanity?
Absolutely, unequivocally, yes.
Got to.
Thank you.
I thank the senator. I thank him for respecting the time as well. I appreciate that very much. Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank both of you for your work. And I think you have the right formula, and each element will be controversial. We understand that. So let me deal with the limited time that I have on the one dealing with the revenues. And I know that you've already had some discussion in regards to consumption taxes, but I want to carry it to make a point here. We get around to tax reform, if we're lucky, about every 25 years. So it's important we get this right, and that we have a goal in your report to have revenues equal to about 21% of our economy. That is a revenue goal that could be achieved through the reforms in the income tax that you have outlined, or it could be by using some consumption taxes as well as using our income tax. But the revenues would be the same. Now, I mention that because since we passed the last major tax reform in 1986, our chairman frequently points out that there's now 140 provisions in the tax code that have been added temporarily and need to be reviewed for extensions on a regular basis. My concern is that if we were to pass the recommendations of the Commission, it's unlikely that that would stand for very long before Congress would once again, for reasons of political expediency, use the tax code rather than the revenue code in order to carry out some policy. I think we're safer if we use less income tax revenues and we have more consumption revenues to equal the dollars that we want to bring in. And I also point out the realities of competitiveness and the fact that during the best of times, this nation did not save enough. And our policies need to reward savings. Senator Portman and I worked together in the House to try to encourage more savings for Americans. And our tax code certainly has not been terribly helpful in rewarding savings. And lastly, we know that the income taxes, the corporate income taxes, are not border adjusted, whereas the consumption taxes are border adjusted in international trade, which puts American manufacturers and producers at a disadvantage. The argument I hear the most against consumption taxes is progressivity. But we can make a consumption tax progressive, and we have ways of doing it. One of my goals is to make sure that at the end of the day, we bring in revenues in a more progressive way, not a less progressive way than we currently bring in the revenues of this nation. So having said all that, and knowing full well that you all really did your best to put forward the policy objectives that this nation needs, and we're certainly realistic to know that your proposals are going to be politically controversial wherever you went. Could you just share with me why we shouldn't be considering, as a matter of policy, less reliance on income and more on consumption, knowing full well the history of Congress in changing the tax code?
I'll be glad to do that. Let me tell you why it's not in our plan. It's pretty simple. About a week before we started, the U.S. Senate voted, I think, 85-14, and it didn't look to me like the odds were too great we were going to have a consumption tax. Secondly,
well, you know, I'm going to stop you on that because a lot of us were tempted to put in similar resolutions on Social Security, similar resolutions on every one of your proposals, and I dare say we could have gotten 85 votes on the floor of the Senate on each one of those individual recommendations. I think it was terribly irresponsible for the Senate to take up that resolution.
I'm just telling you why we didn't do it. There was no opposition on the commission, as near as I could tell, to a VAT tax or a consumption tax in theory. Most people believe that it's much better to tax consumption if you can do it on a progressive basis than it is to tax wages or investment or savings. You got to make it progressive. But there wasn't a lot of opposition in theory on either side of the aisle. Where there was enormous concern was that we'd end up with two engines of revenue. We'd end up with an income tax that would be escalated, and we'd end up with a consumption tax, and you'd have two engines out there fueling revenue and fueling the tax rate. And that's why there wasn't support for it in our commission. It wasn't the theory that it's better to tax consumption.
Well, I feel better getting that explanation because, you know, I just conclude on this point. We want the best policy objectives. Future Congresses are going to act regardless of what we do in this Congress on these recommendations. I just think we're safer having a tax code that's less likely to be changed in the future for social reasons than we currently do under the income tax.
Well, I think